Almost everyone believes in Darwinism, yet we also maintain our faith in a higher power. Isn't it incredible that we have such a diverse selection of beliefs regarding the origin of mankind? It's a topic that sparks an enthusiastic debate within any group and anywhere in the world. Are we simply the end product of evolution, or are we the creation of the Almighty? I believe that the answer is yes. Yes, we are. It's both. My name is Harvey Turner. The next 8 videos are the 8 chapters of my book, The Ori-Genes of Mankind, which I will publish in 2021. They are all short story videos. I hope that you enjoy them. This first chapter is called The 5 Lemurs. Madagascar is an island on the other side of the world that we have all heard of. It is famous for its hundreds of isolated plant groups as well as unique mammal and reptile species. Lemurs are just one of many mammals that are found on Madagascar, and there are more than 30 varieties of lemurs found only there. The island has been home to several other varieties of mammals, but none have developed there exclusively and in such numbers and variety as the lemur. This story starts with 5 adult lemurs whom decided to go a different route across the jungle so that they could get to the fig trees well ahead of the rest of their numerous troop. As they were hopping along the open areas and traveling through the trees, they found something above them and way up in one of the larger trees. The 5 of them stopped to look at it. It was unlike anything that they had ever seen before. There were many flat branches that had been placed to span from one of the large branches all the way over to the other large branches. They all took a moment and surveyed this wide, flat, weird-looking branch. Peter the Wise decided to act first, so he climbed up and landed at the edge of the flat structure and started walking carefully around its edges. He sniffed at it with his gray whiskers and then turned back to the others whom were waiting for his announcement. "We have all heard the legends of Thomas the Great, whom ruled our troop way back when there were thousands of us scouting through the forest." The 4 lemurs nodded in confirmation. There had been a day when there were plenty of fig trees and hundreds of lemurs. "This is the platform from which Thomas himself looked out over the valley." Peter the Wise paused and then looked out at the treetops and the view. "We are centered perfectly between the waterfall and the fig trees," he gestured back and forth, "and this is where he made his commands and watched over the land." The other lemurs listened and thought about what Peter the Wise had said. "But how?" George asked. "How did he make these straight branch things, and how did he get them way up here?" "He had thousands of us at his command," Peter replied. "Thousands. He needed only to tell them what he wanted." Fowler replied first with, "Yeah, that makes sense to me." But Fowler usually followed in with whatever anybody said about anything. And Quiet Carl didn't say a word, as usual. He didn't care less. There weren't any figs here. But George didn't agree with the idea that even 1,000 lemurs could make this possible. How could numbers help to shape so many of them and to place them way up here? He asked. Peter the Wise replied, "You cannot argue with our great legends, George." A long moment passed as they all just looked at it. Then Timmy the Troll stepped forward finally and stated, "You're both just idiots." And then he walked across the wide flat platform and bounded into the trees and branches at the other side. It was now clear to George how Timmy the Troll had received his title. Quiet Carl went right into the branches after him, hoping that Timmy the Troll at least knew where the fig trees were. Peter the Wise and Fowler the Follower then also turned and strutted proudly off the platform that their ancestors had apparently built long, long ago. George watched them go, and then he knelt down and touched the long, beautiful branches again. They were so straight, and they fitted together so perfectly. He hopped over to the strangely shaped ends and found that they were fastened to the branches with long curls of some tough, tasteless root. "Oh," he said, "we cannot do this kind of thing. This is impossible. Yet here it is. It's been done. I must come back here someday and figure this out." And with that, George turned and leaped into the branches to catch up with the others. After a long stretch of swinging and hopping, they discovered 2 stacks of stone in a small clearing on the forest floor. One of them had a perfectly round rock on top of it, and the other had a strange crooked branch sticking up. They walked carefully between them and continued on. At the ocean's edge, they found a perfectly round stone mountain towering well above the jungle. They went around it out of pure fear and didn't slow down at all. The route that these 5 lemurs had decided to take that day went along the ocean and around the mountain that sat between the waterfall and the fig trees. Their troop, numbering almost 40 lemurs, had always either gone up and over the mountain or along the river in the valley all the way to the fig trees, and then back again every afternoon to sleep in the trees near the waterfall. Their troop leaders had always stayed away from the coast. For these 5 lemurs, on this day, the reasons for staying inland had been forgotten. Next, they went up a hill and found a rock unlike any other that they had ever seen before. It was huge and square, and it was hollow. From this rock, they had an incredible view of the ocean. The 5 of them sat on its flat top and enjoyed the sun and the view and the breeze. At each of these places, Peter the Wise had shared the legends of Thomas the Great and of his grand troop back when they numbered in the thousands. Fowler had agreed every time. He understood the power of numbers. Quiet Carl had kept to himself. He had found a few fruit trees along the way, and he really didn't care much about what his ancestors had done a long time ago. But George had been very intrigued by these strange stones. He had rubbed his hands around the round stones, and he had studied the amazing edges of the straight stones. He had always been the last one to leave each place. And Timmy the Troll always said the same thing to Peter and George before bounding off into the trees. "Ah, you're both just idiots." The trip along the coastline proved to be no faster to the fig trees than the usual route, as Peter the Wise and his friends joined with the others for lunch at the usual time. The entire troop sat around while Peter and Fowler talked about the legends and what they had seen that morning. The command house of Thomas the Great, the guardians of Thomas the Great, the temple of Thomas the Great, and the tomb of Thomas the Great. It had all been a spectacular and dangerous journey. George respected the wisdom of Peter, and he could see why Fowler tended to go along with Peter's history lessons. And he could also understand why Carl didn't care at all. Finding future eating places is just as important as knowing where they all ate a long time ago. It was Timmy that George couldn't figure out. Timmy didn't agree with any of them, and he would rudely tell people that they were idiots. He couldn't or wouldn't present any independent ideas of his own. For the rest of the day, as the stories of the places that they had found filtered through the troop, George the Curious noticed that every lemur in the troop agreed firmly with one of the 5 lemurs whom had ventured to the coastline that morning. At least 14 were with Peter the Wise and Fowler the Follower. At least 7 were with Quiet Carl and simply didn't care. Another 7 agreed with Timmy and thought that Peter and George were idiots for even trying. And then there were 7 lemurs asking George to describe in detail what he saw. They sat around trying to figure out how the impossible could actually be possible. So where does this lesson take us? In Peru and Egypt and Jordan, there are several examples of impossible stones, and we have responded to them in one of 5 ways. Well, if you made it this far through this story, then I know exactly what kind of lemur you are. So, stay curious. We can and must figure this out, but please, don't be a troll. You are amongst the fastest growing group of new believers on this planet. Advances in technology and genetics and carbon dating are giving us new perspectives on our real history. Our eyes are now being opened to the logical story of what happened and why here on Earth only 13,000 years ago. Please enjoy my next chapter. Thank you.